Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack.
You know who I can do without? I can do without the people in the video store.
Which ones?
All of them. They never rent quality flicks. They always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
And now, on with the show.
We are back from a somewhat, a few week, maybe how long has it been hiatus? I'm not 100% sure, but we are back with a loose cannon, and it is the month of October, and that means we're finally, after discussing it off and on for a couple of years, trying to figure out how we would actually fit this kind of programming in, doing our Cronenberg watch, because since I joined This Week in Geek, it came to my attention that for somebody who's a big horror fan, Birdman has only ever seen, or at least before I came along, you'd only ever seen like maybe The Fly, and then I had been suggesting some other movies, and then with Aaron joining us, it was, hey, he's seen a few of them, but like I feel like, or I felt like both of you guys had sort of the misconception that every single one of his films was like some crazy gross out thing. And I mean, there's an aspect of that there, but I was like, you know what, let's just break up his movies into chunks. So each week we're going to sort of go, this week is the 70s films, then we have the 80s, and we're going to sort of merge some of the 90s with the 2000s, because not everything he did was horror, and there's larger gaps between his filmmaking credits in that time period, leading up into Halloween, obviously, because it's the spooky month and everything. Sure. So obviously, we're back. I think we've all sort of been busy in different aspects. Aaron, you've been pretty busy with nonstop Earth versus Soup, right?
Yeah. We've slowed down recording a little bit lately, but I know we have a lot in the bank, so to speak. But now it's kind of become having to do research to figure out what we can get a hold of that we haven't watched.
Because you've like burned through a ton of like all the well-known weird movies from that time period.
See, I don't know if I'd go so far. We actually have a stack of, I would say, classics that we have yet to review that we're kind of trying to space out. So the classics we have covered. It's filling the gaps with ones that people can actually get a hold of and watch. That's where it's starting to become a little difficult.
You know what a good resource for that would be, and they have some weird stuff, even, and some old stuff, but also stuff that might fit into your wheelhouse from the 70s, even like that era where everything was transitioning. Have you ever been to Tubi TV?
I have not been to Tubi, no.
Okay,
Tubi has a surprising amount of stuff on there from like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Some of it really kind of lesser known, but their horror section floats between being, I can't believe you have the rights to this, to it's a clown in a motel and a killer dog. Some of it's really fucking dumb, but some of it's really good.
Picture it's somewhere in between like a Netflix and a YouTube, in that it's ad supported, completely free, and to watch you have to sign in with either an email address if you sign up for an account, or it can sign you in if you have a Facebook account. So it has a variety. Some stuff stays forever, but a lot of stuff changes fairly frequently, like every couple months. And we've used it as a resource for some of our commentaries we've done before, because there's some stuff on there that doesn't have a DVD release even. Like we're talking stuff that had a VHS release, but they've got it in high definition.
Wow.
Like they somehow worked out rights to it, and it's just that it's ad supported. So every 20 minutes or so, you'll have an ad pop up. But if you're just looking for something to watch and then have a resource where, everybody else can jump towards it, that might be something to look at. I'll send you the link to the site, because sometimes I type in Tubi and it doesn't go there. I'm like, oh yeah, it's TubiTV whatever.
Okay.
And with you, Mike, I know you've been busy.
Yeah.
to say the least, but you finally got around to sitting down and watching these, and we're opening up with the 70s. We purposely didn't go with, like, we have the resources to watch everything, but his late 60s, early 70s period was when he was just finishing university. So this is, Cronenberg's start was doing these sort of artsy fartsy films. And of note, those two films that he did that were student films or right out of school were Stereo, which is I think is like 60 minutes long, and it is boring. And I'm talking boring. It's not worth watching at all. And Crimes of the Future is in that same realm. A lot of it was filmed, I think, at the University of Toronto campus and some at Scarborough College, maybe. But it's only notable now for being the next movie he's making. He's going back to his original idea for that film and fleshing it out into a modern, real Hollywood picture starring Viggo Mortensen. And I believe they're off filming it right now. So he's going back to his very beginning roots to do a modern take on that film, which will hopefully be watchable versus the original. So, you fast forward a couple of years. He spent 2 or 3 years working for the Canadian government, I think the National Film Board of Canada, making, like, Mike, you remember those hinterland little documentaries that show on TV, and they used to make fun of them on, like, Bob and Doug McKenzie, the Kulu-Koo-Koo-Koo-Koo-Koo. That's making fun of the old musical intro that they would use for those nature docs were put in between programming. The CBC didn't air commercials ever back in the day.
Yeah,
so,
they used to run these like a lot.
Yeah, they'd run like these 4 or 5 minute. It would be like 4 or 5 minutes of thing like, here is the loon, here is its habitat, and it would be like what you'd see in school when they were in science class or something.
Okay,
or
that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So he directed a whole bunch of those and PSAs and that, and they used to put those in place of commercials between television shows so that they would line up with what a normal commercial would be. And the idea being, hey, no matter what, keep it on CBC, because you're going to get, instead of somebody trying to sell you Kellogg's cornflakes, you're actually going to learn something in between your regular programming. So he did that, then got bored with it and decided to finance his first real picture. That turned out to be Shivers, known in Canada as Shivers, known in the States as They Came From Within. Maybe there was another film that had a similar title. I think it had a few other initial titles that were shot down. I think it was something about blood orgies and blood parasites.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Well, I mean, it's not too far off what happens in the actual movie, but I think it was something of the blood orgy. And then I heard him say that in a interview, and the response was, "We can't release something with the word orgy in the title." At the time, Canada was actually much more conservative in their films than in the States, which is sort of the flip side now, pretty much because of him and a couple other Canadian directors that changed the attitude to being a little more European. I've said before, we've discussed off recording, that these are his British films, or his closer to British films, in that he casts some British actors. It has somewhat of a British look or pacing to how that they edit some things, but it's also British in the sense that this is at the time when he was fighting censorship, because the Canadian film industry was very tied to the British way of filming and also the British censorship board. So you know how they have the British nasties, I think they called them, the film nasties.
Yeah, film nasties. Yeah,
those were the films that were. He was in that category at the time, because our national ratings board was very tied to whatever was okay in Britain was okay here. The exception being the Quebec film industry, which was flourishing when the English-speaking area really didn't have one, and that's because they had their connections, obviously, to France, and were much more open with how they made their films. It was Cronenberg and some other people that fought against that really got the censorship board to change things and actually helped start our tax credit funds. Like, so when you see like Telefilm Canada and all this, it was him lobbying with a few other people to get that fund made, because previously you could only get government funding for a film or tax breaks if it was for one of those documentary type things. It had to be something educational. And it's like, can you imagine he presented like, what's the educational film you're trying to present to us? A bunch of blood slugs make people want to fuck a lot. like I'm sorry, that's pretty much what it is, right?
Yeah, it is. But you know what? It's honestly a good movie. It might sound dumb, if you sum it up like that.
I don't know. The Shivers, to me, I liked parts of it, but I didn't love all of it. And that's the thing. Like, watching these again, as me and Alex have discussed on the main Twig podcast, is it my mood affecting all of this? Because I was watching, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. I was watching The Brood before this, and I'm thinking, I don't know whether I like Cronenberg so far. I was not impressed, but I love the idea. It's just the idea of sex crazed zombies, especially right at the end of this movie where they hold him down in a pool, and that girl from, I think, if I remember reading it right, I think she's supposed to be underage. I'm thinking, well, this just got creepy and fucked up.
Which one? No, there's a girl in it that's like a granddaughter. She doesn't do any of the sex in it.
No. But just the fact that that happens, and I guess I'm glad that Cronenberg was willing to do provocative things. It's kind of like how in Dawn of the Dead 1977, when Peter goes to the airport, there's the kid zombies in the closet, because that's not something you think about. Like, well, the zombie thing's going to hit everybody. And with Shivers, well, this parasite, it can get to anybody at any time.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to get to younger people. It's going to get to older people. You are not safe regardless of age.
Yeah.
The basic plot is, we'll go into it here. Brand new, I think, what do they call them? Skyliner or Skyline? Something like that. It's a brand new giant apartment building that was built on a new subdivision in an island just off the coast of Montreal on the St. Lawrence. And they're advertising, they're having people move in different units, both elderly, young people, families, working couples. There's a full service medical clinic in the building. That's one of the big selling features is, hey, you don't have to go to a family doctor on the mainland. We have a clinic, and everybody here will be signed up as a patient from the doctor. So you don't have to worry if you feel sick in it. So that's why obviously some old people are going to move there, because they can just, they're feeling bad or they feel sick. You can just go take the elevator down and talk to the doctor. So that's kind of neat. I had mentioned to Aaron beforehand, you got on mic, that it's not as common here, unless you have like really, really big buildings like in Toronto, to have an apartment building with a built-in store or a bodega in it, let alone a clinic. That is much more of an American thing.
Yeah, but this place has more than just a clinic. It has tennis courts, swimming pool, restaurants.
Yeah. I mean, there are places in Toronto specifically that were developed in, like, I guess post 1960, like where there's everything. Yeah,
there's where it's like office buildings above ground and some apartments, and then but below ground there's a connected mall between the multiple buildings. There's a few of those here, but again, that's only Toronto being the place that has that, and maybe Vancouver. I don't think we know enough about that out west.
Yeah,
coast, but
when I was there, I didn't see much, but then again, my mom lived in Coquitlam, so I didn't exactly see a whole lot of Vancouver City proper.
You weren't on the island.
No, not as much.
So, it's sort of trying to build up. This is sort of a secluded, all-inclusive place to live, and then you find out that, well, we'll get into some of the things that happen, but you find out that there's a doctor that was working on, I believe, if I caught it correctly, it's trying to develop a symbiotic, not a parasite, but like a symbiote that would help
replace damaged organs or something.
Damaged organs and tissues, and then it turns out to be a blood parasite. Oh, that's the title. It was Orgy of the Blood Parasites, and that was turned down. The UK title is The Parasite Murders. So it has a different title in every region, but Shivers being the Canadian title, I guess, is what we're going with. So one by one, everybody in this building gets affected, and a few people, including one of the doctors, tries to save things, and it ends with all the people. Well, there's the climactic scene, as you said, Michael, where they attack the doctor, who's like the last one normal, by throwing their sex-crazed bodies at him. Some of them fully nude.
There are actually two women that are fully nude in that scene.
Yeah, in the pool, and they spit one of the blood parasites into his mouth. At the very end, as the credits roll, is everybody who looks like a zombie, and they're all ready to drive into the town, and they're going to spread everything into Montreal.
Yeah, and then the kind of news broadcast says there's been a wave of sexual assaults that began as early as 5 a.m. yesterday. Montreal authorities are currently looking into it. However, if you can stay home, you should probably do that. And it's interesting to think about this, especially because we live in a COVID-19 pandemic world now, and just looking at how people would react to a virus. Some people are going to believe it, some people are not. Which we talk a lot. That's a lot more relevant when we look at, say, Rabid, which will be the next film we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
But I thought some of the ideas in this, like I said, were fairly interesting. And because this came out, what year was this, Alex? But 74, was it?
75.
75.
75.
Interesting tidbit for you here. This was the most profitable Canadian film made to date. And it was a surprising hit. Because remember, domestically, this made $1 million on $100,000 some odd dollar budget. But it says that it was so controversial in its sex and violence that the Parliament of Canada debated on its social and artistic value because they were considering blocking it from being released. So this made it to the federal level where they had to debate in Parliament whether or not this film could even be allowed to be released. And it's
That's crazy.
I mean, in most aspects, it's tame compared to what we're used to now. But I guess some of the concepts in there were messed up. I think at face value, what might have caused some of that was the opening scene to the movie.
I have that written down as one of my notes. That opening scene with the older guy tearing the shirt off.
Sigmund Freud attacking what looks to be a teenage girl.
Yeah, and it's like, well, okay, now there's a topless underage girl theoretically here, and no one is screaming. That's the thing, like no one screams. It's almost silent, this like assault. And you're not sure what the hell's going on, except that, hey, this old guy is probably the villain. He's attacking this young girl. And then it turns out he's not really the villain. Like, so it kind of turns your expectations around.
Yeah, he was actually trying to save her he was trying to pin her down because she was going to spread the parasites, and he was going to try to remove the parasites and save her.
Yeah, and it turns out that she actually did spread the parasites because she was sleeping with like the old pervert in the building.
She was sleeping with a few people, and it was hinted while she looked like she was dressed as like a high school, she was actually a college student.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they did say that she was 18 later on,
and that she was attending like one of those French private, I guess private universities for women, and that's why she had a uniform on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Shivers, interesting ideas. The problem I noticed with a lot of the early Cronenberg stuff, and I did notice this across the 3 movies that he did that I watched, because I watched Shivers, The Brood, and what's the other one I watched? Rabid. The movies have terrible pacing. Holy shit, really? Do they ever have? I did not like the pacing in any of these, with the exception of The Brood, because it was held up by Art Hindle. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I like ideas in this, and I kind of like how the parasite sort of reminds me of Alien, how it has to gestate inside a host. And like Alex had just said, the idea was to develop this parasite or foster it so it could replace regenerating organs. And Cronenberg really kind of ahead of his time, because I've been watching a lot of Italian horror movies, and a few weeks ago, actually, Alex had me review it was an Argento movie. What was it? The Crystal Plumage or something?
The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Yeah, and there's a plot where they talk about genetics and DNA, and it's interesting to see horror directors as early as that 70s talk about advanced ideas in science we just kind of take for granted now. We're like, oh, there's DNA, there's gene sequencing, there's this, that, and the other thing. Like, this is going to be, I'm going to frame it in kind of a weird way, but follow me here. There is a idea in the Resident Evil universe of video games and movies. There actually is a parasite known as the Nemesis parasite, which you can guess what that gives rise to. The idea of using these things to help people or weaponizing them is not uncommon. So in Resident Evil 4 and 5, there's a Las Plagas parasite, and that takes over people. So it's kind of cool to see I wonder if the guy who did Resident Evil, I can't remember, Mikami, I think his name was. I wonder if he took ideas from stuff like this, or whether this has just become a part of the culture
Yeah, don't
as
be
horror movies
surprised.
have kind of gone on.
Cronenberg's films are really popular in Japan, like more popular than you would expect. Also, if you look, they don't explicitly state it, but Cronenberg he was from that first generation of art students that went to the Toronto Film School when that was like new. So he was of that generation, like George Lucas, Spielberg, and that went to either UCLA or they went to NYU. But Toronto was like, that was at the forefront. So being a university dude, he was somebody who was always fascinated by reading whatever the most modern science papers were. So it was like, Popular Science magazine, but he would look at academic papers and see what they were working on, and he was influenced by the idea of the transformation of the body and the sciences of that. So obviously that's why the body horror stuff is all attributed to him. But if you look at what the samples in the office when the scientist is trying to explain what their job was, what they were trying to do, it's all samples of things like squid and those, what are they, what's the super deadly mini jellyfish that are in like Australia? Those are the ones
Box jellies.
where they talk about now how like they technically can live forever. They just regenerate over and over.
Yeah,
and over again.
box jellyfish.
Yeah, those are in there, and it's clear that was around the time that these research papers were starting to be done. So, the idea of them having regenerative properties and all this, while it's in its early state, it's clear that that's what he was influenced by. Was it was like, oh, they're using what fringe science was available at the time, and he's trying to adapt it. Also, the one doctor there, the one scientist guy with the glasses, he looked like a Canadian version of Henry Kissinger.
Yes.
which I found funny. But yeah, like it's good for a debut commercial film. The pacing, Mike, that is what I mean by like some of the British movies, like I say, is like it is a slow burn, but I think Aaron and I like a lot of the older films like that are like you're used to, Mike, like the pacing of the 80s.
Yes,
is a lot
very
faster.
much so. Yes, very
yeah,
much
and
so.
I thought the pacing was fine. Like, yeah, it's 1970s, sure, absolutely, it has its problems, but and it is slower than an 80s film or a 90s film, but I thought it was perfectly serviceable for what it was.
And then we move on, I guess, to Rabid. So I mean, it's an entertaining feature. I think you could search it out. I had mentioned, that Shivers was very hard to find for a long time.
I think it's on the Criterion streaming thing, but I'm not sure.
In England, it was released with the Masters of Horror or Masters of Cinema series. It has Blu-ray releases that just came out, but for years, and I'm talking into the early 2000s, there were very limited. There was like a limited edition VHS that came out with an interview that went out of print. I found it at a local Value Village like thrift store. I paid like $2. I sold it for $150 on eBay.
Wow.
Like because there was a DVD that was out of print and that was selling for $300 or $400 at the time. Like he has fans that were trying to search it out. They had such limited print runs on both the VHS and DVD. As far as I know, in Canada, it was only ever released at the time once on VHS, once on DVD, and it was exclusively only in Canada. They never even released it in the States until the Blu-ray. And we're talking like the DVD was like 1998, and there was nothing until like last year or the year before. So like that's how long it went. Even though it's a better, like you would have figured something like that would have appeared in something like a Mill Creek box set, but it never did. Now Rabid, on the other hand, is where I think he got discovered more in the States for a few reasons. This came out a couple years later, same year as Dawn of the Dead. Similar ideas, if you think about it. This is more like, what if George A. Romero actually explained where the zombies came from?
Yeah. I mean, I think both of these films, Rabid and Shiver, both have a lot of Romero feel to them, but Rabid a bit more so. And this is kind of a slow burn Dawn of the Dead kind of feeling to it. That it's things are just starting. We're seeing society fall apart. We're not like really trapped in a single setting like Night of the Living Dead, but Dawn of the Dead, we're kind of going places and seeing how the world is kind of starting to fall apart and how it's starting to deal with these problems.
Yeah, and it has I think 4 or 5 times the budget of Shivers, probably based on the fact that the first one made a whole bunch of money. Now, interesting little tidbit here. Cronenberg had tried to cast Sissy Spacek in the film role, but apparently the studio vetoed her because of her accent.
Huh.
My guess being it wouldn't have fit with Montreal, I guess, because this was still a purely Canadian-funded film. He didn't have any ties to any American studio yet. So instead, he goes the opposite direction and casts Marilyn Chambers, who at the time was one of the top known adult film actresses in the world. So like she was right off of doing porn, and we're talking at the time when porn was shown in like regular theaters. When you'd hear like on Johnny Carson, you'd have people talking about how they went to see one of her films.
There is something about Rabid and her performance in this I didn't expect. She has a very noticeable charisma and a very noticeable screen presence. And I've never seen her work previous to this. I mean, I've heard about it for obviously decades. But she's remarkably likable. She's vulnerable. And she's really the heart of this movie. And even the guy that plays Hart in this, I really liked him. Like I felt this was better cast than Shivers. And it
100% agree. Yeah. 100%.
And some of the people return from Shivers, some of the better actors. But yeah, you're right. Like it's the lead, like, and it's a weird thing. Like she's the lead, but it spends vastly more time with her boyfriend.
One of the things I did like about this, particularly because I love a good downer ending. I love the Romero-esque ending, and there's one moment in this I'm really surprised they went there. The boyfriend comes home with one of his I guess one of the people he's been working with the entire movie. I can't remember it, like one of the other doctors from the keloid clinic. And he comes home and him and his wife have a baby. So the boyfriend Hart takes the car, drops off his doctor friend. He goes away. So the scientist or the doctor enters his house and he's like, "Honey, where are you?" Silence. Mm-hmm. "Honey, where are you?" Silence. And he goes upstairs and he's thinking, that should have woken the baby up. Because at one point he gets a phone call and he's nursing a baby on his knee. And he's like, "Do you know what hour it is? Anyway, talk to me." So he goes upstairs. He goes into the nursery. And it's silent. And he goes over to the crib. It's empty. He's thinking, oh shit, what's going on? So he goes over to what I guess is a baby bathing table or some kind of a changing device. And he leans down and he puts his hands in blood. And he's like, oh my God, what's wrong here? And he goes up and he starts to rise from his knees. And he opens up this compartment where, again, I guess that's where the baby was bathed or something. And
it's a changing table.
Yeah, and it's a super quick shot, but you get the point. It's covered in blood and gore. You don't see a lot. I actually went back and watched it frame by frame. It's just a bunch of bloody water. And he's like, oh my God. And he starts breaking down. And then he hears something behind him. And it's just as he's about to have a very realistic reaction, his wife, who's infected, who ate the baby, attacks him and kills him. Mm-hmm. And I was about to say, you had the balls to kill a baby. I can't think of any horror movie that has had the balls to. I've seen movies where kids get attacked and die, most notably
not
the
Baby
Blob.
Blood, though.
Yeah, not Baby Blood. The only movies I can think where a kid dies is Return of the Living Dead Part 2, where technically the kid comes back from the dead, which that movie has an amazing soundtrack, by the way. And the Blob remake from 1988, where the kid gets sucked into the blob, into the sewer, and he turns into a skeleton, and it's fucking gruesome.
I would also
and Toxic Avenger. Yeah.
The Dawn of the Dead remake technically has an unborn baby rip out of the womb.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
Oh
that.
yeah.
Zack Schneider, yeah. But
Yeah,
like
I will say that like violence against babies, like I freaking hate it. Whenever it does pop up in a film, it's rare, but man, it just it really upsets me. But to be honest, this film
was
is good
tastefully.
enough. Yeah, it's good enough. It's well enough done that it's not like it doesn't dwell on it.
Yeah, it's more about the horror of the event and not about having to shove it in your face.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, Cronenberg does something that Romero did from Dawn of the Dead, because like you guys said, that was the same year. This virus, this pathogen, it affects everybody. And that's what I love. It doesn't matter what your relationship is. It doesn't matter how well prepared you are. When shit goes south, it goes south fast. And it doesn't matter who gets in the way, because not everyone's going to make it out alive. And Cronenberg matched Romero in that regard, where nobody was safe. It doesn't matter whether you were a child with little bonnets in your hair or whatever. You were just as much a victim as the person who had the machine gun. I really like that darkness.
It keeps into the same themes as the first one, with it being some sort of mutagenic effect on the body. It starts out with Marilyn Chambers and her boyfriend get into a car accident with their motorcycle, and they are brought to a brand new plastic surgery specialist clinic that is also like a research center for new techniques. They decide, we're going to pro bono you. Actually, this would have been in the age of healthcare that's free, so they get special treatment and they get some experimental grafts done. For the most part, her boyfriend just needed I think he needed some skin grafts for his arm, and he had to have his bones reset, and I think he has problems, he has pins in his back or something. This is still at an era when like this, where a lot of plastic surgery and reconstructive surgery was really coming into its own. You know, if you had jumped back 20 years, it would have been like, well, he has to lose that arm. So he gets that, but she's more severely hurt and needs more time to recover. And they did a bunch of grafts on her. Well, something happens, and it's maybe something similar to what was happening in Shivers, where the way she heals, her body develops a new organ and appendage that's almost like a stinger that has some sort of toxic chemical that affects the brain and is similar to getting rabies. That's never quite explained. They don't even know how it happened, because it starts spreading so quickly. They don't have the ability to even study her.
And it's weird that it comes out of her armpit. Obviously, it's where like they grafted skin onto her.
Yeah,
but it's in such a weird place that I don't know. They have to like contrive reasons for her to like hug people.
Yeah, and it's plays, and I mean, ultimately, if he wanted to get Sissy Spacek, it was actually smarter casting to have Marilyn Chambers being a big porn actress. The idea, I guess, subconsciously, it's like, oh, she's the porn actress, but she's penetrating you. There's a lot of somewhat pseudo sexual vibes from everything here. It's a new appendage. She pulls people in with men. She goes after them sexually. She goes after the one woman sexually too in the hot tub.
Yes.
And the idea that it's some sort of uncontrollable STD that is giving people rabies, almost like it's predates the AIDS epidemic, but it's like, what if the AIDS epidemic of the 70s and 80s was actually some sort of rabies induced zombie thing? It's sort of like, how fast could it spread and what would happen. Also, the idea that how the government reacts to it, I can't think of very many, if any, pictures beforehand that tried to give a realistic portrayal of what a military controlled or like a military rule pandemic containment would be like. Like it's pretty realistic, and like they're wearing full body suits, they're spraying down cars, they're shooting people on sight. When the doctor, or the the head of the Canadian Health Board says that shooting them is as best a cure as any.
Yeah, I was like, holy crap, and this is in Canada, man. And there's like one thing I should say in this too is that for having a porn actress as the lead, this movie does not have very much nudity.
From her, surprisingly, very
yeah,
surprising.
yeah. Well, I mean, overall, there's just very little in this compared to like Shiver. Like Shiver, there was lots. This is like there's 4 instances I counted.
And
But-
I almost
but anyway, yeah.
wonder if part of that is, again, Cronenberg trying to be wise ass with it. It's like, oh yeah, he's going to get all this publicity for casting the biggest porn star in America, and then she's not going to take her clothes off.
And Mike, I thought I think I mentioned this to Alex that while watching this movie, I found it interesting that there was lots of World War II equipment on display.
Yeah, I was noticing like when the cop in the mall shoots the Rabid guy and Santa Claus, I'm like, is that an MP40 or is that my imagination?
It's not an MP40.
What is it?
It's a Tommy gun.
Really? Okay.
It's
So,
a Tommy
totally
gun
wrong.
with a stick mag. It's a Tommy gun with a stick mag. There is a Sten gun actually in the movie as well, which is like a British submachine gun. But yeah, there's lots of weird World War II equipment that it's mostly US though, which is strange.
I wonder if they just put out a call for like museums to hand over equipment to you.
It was probably whoever was the cheapest armor available at the time, because where this was filmed, this was Montreal again, right?
Yeah.
It's probably whatever film warehouse had equipment, and it wouldn't surprise me if they sourced from the local reenactment community either. It really wouldn't surprise me.
But that scene in the mall with Santa,
yeah.
God, that was fantastic.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Because the guard like just guns all those people down. Like, yeah, he kills the Rabid guy and Santa Claus, who wasn't infected, and I think he wounds like in front of children, and wounds like 2 or 3 others. And I cracked up. I had to pause the movie because his reaction is great. He's just like, "Oh, geez," and that's it. Like he looks a little shocked, but he's like, "Oh, geez."
Dudley fucking do right there.
Oh, geez, I just murdered a bunch of people. Oh, shit.
Well, sorry about that.
Pretty much.
It made me laugh. Oh, that was great. That was great.
He wasted fucking Santa.
So yeah, this is another one that, ended up becoming a pretty big grosser, a multi-million-dollar picture overall. And it has that memorable scene that was used on the poster and box art of the girl in the freezer.
Yeah. One thing that I loved about this, and this, I'm going to mention the whole COVID-19 thing again, because I think this draws an interesting kind of parallel. She doesn't believe that she's the carrier behind all this. So after she attacks somebody, she brings him back to this guy's apartment, and she calls Hart, I think that's his name, and she says, yeah, I'm going to stay with him until he turns. I need to know, is this true or not? Am I the one responsible? And he's like, no, you really are. You need to get the fuck out of there. We're going to deal with this. We're going to get a cure. You're immune. We can do this. And she's like, no. I've done my own research. I need to know for myself. And that's an understandable position to a certain extent. But she's lying there on the couch, half asleep. And this guy, not quite reanimates, but he's infected clearly now. So he slowly gets up from the couch, slowly makes his way over to her, hovers over her. She's still talking to the boyfriend. He's screaming and begging her to get out. You hear her get tore apart. Scene transitions to him smashing the phone and him crying about it. It's game over. She's gone. Rose, I think that's the character's name, is dead. And it cuts away to an alleyway at an undetermined amount of time later, sometime in the morning anyway. And her body is just in an alleyway. And there's like a Doberman, like kind of sniffing at it. So these guys in full NBC suits, so nuclear, biological, and chemical suits, see the body. They're like, oh, just throw it on the fire. That's the cure right there.
Well, the first thing they do is they shoot her in the head.
Yeah.
to make sure she's dead. They throw her in the back of the garbage truck, which is interesting how they would, their idea of containing the virus is to throw the dead bodies in a garbage truck and crush her.
Yeah. And I just got
so
to thinking,
yeah, exactly. Cure's gone, end of the world.
Yeah. And
And
I was
see,
thinking,
I had
that's
the
dark.
I actually had the exact opposite reaction, that this isn't the end of the world. And the reason is that they say over and over and over again that the people that are infected kind of lose their minds, right? They're not intelligent, and they will die within 2 days.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they did say, well, when they had the lineups of people, and you had the people that were like, "Don't tell me what to do, blah blah, stay away from me, don't touch me." When they were having them go through, I guess, to get screened and show your vaccine passport.
Yeah.
No, basically, the idea was that they said they were working on some sort of inoculation, but they didn't know how long it was going to take.
And at the end of the film, they do say that there is a vaccine, but it does not protect you against the crazies, like the actual physical violence.
Yeah. So I guess the idea is they would have locked down the city and made it so that the army wouldn't let people in or out. So, but still, the idea that, all she had to do was listen, and they could have solved a lot of it. So
Yeah.
Cool. I do think, like, this, obviously having the bigger budget, having a better cast overall, stands the test of time. In fact, I think it just had a remake a year or two ago.
Yeah, and supposedly it wasn't that good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most notable
Is that
thing
the one with CM Punk?
Yeah, the wrestler CM Punk is in it.
Get the fuck out of here.
I mean, sure, why not? I mean, I think it's the only film of his outside of Scanners that has had a sequel or remake. So, I mean, it's a simple enough concept to do. And yeah, a look at what we thought a pandemic would be like in the 70s.
I don't know. Pretty close. People ignoring, scientists.
Yeah, I do love. I love how instead of like using some sort of futuristic tech to like make up some sort of government agency that comes in and tries to save it, they went very grounded. It's the regular military pulled in. They commandeer a bunch of garbage trucks, and they're just going around town shooting anybody infected and throwing them in the back. That's their idea of saving people.
Washing people's windscreens down with bleach after they get blood sprayed on them.
Yeah, exactly.
That was quality. Yeah, see, I love this movie. This is a good one. I highly recommend it.
So now we move on to the one that Michael didn't see, so we can just give a few pointers.
Oh, right. This is the car crash one, right?
No, it's not.
There's no car crash. Well, I mean, there are car crashes.
You're thinking of what's coming up in a couple weeks, Mike.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There's Fast Company, also known as the least Cronenberg film ever.
Yeah, I was shocked when I watched this, as like, why in the hell is this a David Cronenberg film? This is not a Cronenberg film.
It's a car racing movie from the 70s when that was starting to be like had its big resurgence. Starring, let me think, John Saxon and Michael Nicholas Campbell, also known as Da Vinci from Da Vinci's Inquest. Who was the star of that sci-fi movie that we didn't like. We talked about with Darlene. What was it? I don't even remember the name of it anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it was the H.G. Wells one.
The H.G. Wells. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, that wasn't that good.
Things to Come or whatever it was like. Something like that. Yeah, where he was the main hero in that. So he plays a race car driver in this. The most memorable thing from this film, other than the fact that Cronenberg wrote it and it has nothing to do with any other type of film he's ever made, is that all I could think of, it was like he was trying to break into the American audience, or like, was this something he needed to do to finance his own pictures, sort of thing. It has an 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which
I don't get that.
Which I think is higher than almost all of his other films. And nobody if you talk to any of his fans, almost nobody, unless they're a super fan, know that this film exists. And yet it's like, it came out, he did 2 movies in the same year, and this was one of them. Also, the other memorable thing with this is it's got its own theme song.
It does.
Which is, and it's very 70s.
Yeah, I put it when we were talking beforehand. I kind of put it in the same category as Convoy. Like, this is not my film, but I could totally see my father loving to watch this and Convoy right after each other.
Yeah,
You know,
like if this movie had been made 5-10 years earlier, it would have been starring like James Garner or like Steve McQueen or something.
yeah, for sure, for sure. It's not bad. It's actually very competently made. It is well written. I'll give Cronenberg credit for that. But it's just so outside of his usual. I don't know what you would expect from Cronenberg. That I don't know. It's a well enough made movie. Like I said, it's just not a Cronenberg film, so to speak.
Yeah, so I just wanted, like, we're only briefly talking about it because I wanted you to see it. And Michael, eventually, if you just pop it on one time, watch like the first 5 minutes, you'll be like, what? Just to show you that Cronenberg isn't just a body horror one-trick pony. When he threw up something strange like this, it's almost like, did he make it for the sake of telling everybody he made a regular movie?
Like, yeah, a banal, regular, nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary movie.
Yeah, he made basically a drive-in movie, and not like a genre picture. This is just like, you could have put this right next to, like you said, Convoy, or like I don't know, any other. You could put this right next to like Grand Theft Auto the original, or you could put this against what was the one that Ron Howard made? It was like not Grand Prix. That's the
There's Vanishing Point too, which is kind of
yeah, Vanishing Point, or the original one called The Driver. That was like a 70s driving, car movie. You could do stuff like that. And I think there's one called like White Lines or something. There was a ton of these movies at the time. It's like a dime a dozen in the late 70s. So from like 75 to like 82, there were a ton of these. So yeah, that's just that. It's the weirdest part about it is, you'll start watching it, you'll wait the whole movie and be like, okay, so when does somebody's head explode? And the answer is, this is not a movie that does that.
I said that I expected this movie to have like some sort of horrific car accident where somebody is badly burned and they have to have like their body fused into the car or something like that to continue racing. And
Death Race 2000, this is not.
Yeah, nope, not at all.
So then we move on to his other 1979 feature film, The Brood. This is the one that Michael said he was trying to not fall asleep while watching.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, once it really picks up, it gets really good, especially in the last like 15-20 minutes. Art Hindle, it's funny, I was watching this with my next door neighbor Liam, and do you guys remember when the Han Solo prequel came out a couple of years ago?
I remember that date. I never watched it.
But do you remember the face of the actor that Aaron something or other?
Yeah, he's the star of the new what's it called, Brave New World TV show.
Does he not look like that guy, Art Hindle? I was like, wow, if you told me this was the guy's father, I would have believed you. But yeah, he is so good in this.
Well, and he came he stepped off of the set of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and right onto this like a week or two later.
Wow. And the Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, excuse me, is really good.
I feel like almost anybody that like from our generation that knows it only really thinks about the very end scene with Sutherland pointing and doing the scream. But, not even realizing that that he's not just the only star of that film.
Yeah. I mean, Nimoy's in that too, but we're getting off the point of
but yeah, so like this, he was riding high off of a big hit and came in to do this Cronenberg film, and they needed a couple other stars at the time, so to get it financed, because he had this idea, apparently presented it to the producers and the film companies, and they're like, yeah, you can do your crazy weird batshit thing. And they looked at the script and went, you're going to have to get a couple stars that we can anchor this around that will actually get it into theaters. So the other stars he got were Samantha Eggar and Oliver Reed, also known as like one of the worst drunks on set ever.
Yeah. So I actually didn't finish this movie. And I will admit that. I did not finish this movie. the beginning of it, when we show the little girl, her name is what, Candace?
Yeah, Candy. Yeah.
Yeah.
The actual injuries that she has, they don't really focus on them very, very much, which is good, but they were really unsettling to me. Just because I do foster care, and I've seen kind of stuff before, and it was just upsetting. Now, I didn't stop the movie there. I kept going, but I was like, man, this Oliver Reed playing Dr. Hal Raglan, is that his name?
Yeah, Raglan.
Something like that. Yeah.
Dr. Raglan. He might have been a giant jerk off screen and a drunk, and I believe it, but his character was just such an awful human being, like an abusive psychologist and therapist. And I'm like, man, I can't watch this anymore. I just can't.
That's kind of who he is in
so
real life
awful.
too. What you saw on screen is kind of honestly who he was. So we won't go too deep into this one then, obviously.
No, feel free. Feel free.
Okay.
I still I did watch like a good hour of it.
Okay. Because to give context, like obviously they did something right when that sort of abuse didn't look fake. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
You have to praise, even if it was very uncomfortable. You have to praise the realism of it, knowing obviously that nobody was ever in any danger and none of the kids were actually hurt.
Yeah,
all.
absolutely. Oh no, credit where credit's due. If it unsettled me in that way, absolutely.
Especially being one that's over 40 years old at this point. Like they did quite the job that way. It is, again, it's a slow burn, as a lot of his earlier pictures were. Now, what this ends up being that you didn't get to see at the end is Samantha Eggar's character has internalized her fury, psychosis, and every raw, like, seething emotion she has been internalized using the methods that Dr. Raglan sort of taught her or forced upon her. And what's happening is she's actually mutating her body and growing these like slave children. And there's a point that's the big reveal at the end of the film is she opens up her dress, and attached to her body are like these growing egg sacs.
That almost made me puke because I wasn't feeling good in the first place. I was eating a bunch of pickles, I think.
Oh, great.
And I'm sitting there eating it, watching with Liam. I'm thinking, dude, and I will quote this word for word, I am not high enough to deal with this shit.
And it's a pretty horrific scene. And it is, when we discussed off recording, when you said, Aaron, that, you don't like the icky stuff. This is the ickiest scene pretty much outside of The Fly, as far as I know, that he ever did.
Yeah, because I was like, holy shit.
She's basically kneeling on the ground. She opens up her dress in front of Art Hindle's character.
But no nudity.
No, you see some nipples at first.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And she opens up, and it looks like she has the alien egg from Alien, and Aliens, like where the
sure.
She has a big sac like that growing off the side of her, like a giant tumor, and she has a bunch of smaller ones, and they're pulsating and oozing, and like they're growing and shrinking and almost like suction cups on an octopus. And
sure.
She's got a bunch of them. They're all in different stages of development. And what there's these little children that are running around that all look like clones of Candace. And what they are is they're her physical embodiment of her rage, and she can control them with her mind. So what happens is while the big one that's in the giant egg sac, she then bites it open like an umbilical cord, like a cat would do, and takes out the newest baby, and then licks it clean like an animal would do in front of Art Hindle, and he's going like, what the fuck is happening? And at the same time, the doctor has, I guess, sort of come to his senses, and he's trying to save Candace by going into where she's been kidnapped. And at that time, he gets surrounded by all of the sleeping rage clones, and they all start attacking. They all start jumping on him and attacking him, and that's where I had mentioned in real life the kids were so terrified of him because he smelled like booze that they had to be thrown on top of him off screen. So it's almost like one of those films where the behind the scenes is more interesting than what was really happening. And then there's at the end, Samantha Eggar gets strangled to death, and that kills the
rage clones.
Yeah, her rage clones, basically. Yeah, and the very closing scene is it sort of zooms in on Candace, and she's starting to get gross on herself.
Ugh.
So whatever disease her mother had or ability her mother had has now been passed to her through her trauma, and that's how it ends.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, although seeing the little girl hide in the closet when these dwarf things are trying to punch through the door with the rage babies is what I guess we'll call them. That was pretty fucking intense. I'll say. And I don't know, like I said, the last few minutes of this are really good. Gruesome as shit, but really good. One scene that kind of surprised me just how gory it got is where these dwarf rage babies attack a elementary school teacher in front of her class. I was like, holy shit. And this one kid gets the bright idea to run outside and get help. So good for you, kid. And then he's like, so-and-so fell down. They're hurting her. And Art Hindle runs back inside, and you just see this girl's brains all over the floor. And he covers her up with one of the children's drawings that says, "We like pumpkin seeds" or something. And on one hand, that's fucking funny. On another hand, holy shit, that's brutal, because these kids are going to be fucked up for life.
Yeah, it was he cast a bunch of child gymnasts from the area. It was his first film made in Toronto, and it was his first film scored by Howard Shore, who's now done his music score for I think every single film he's made. He's also he's got pretty memorable scores in that he did the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. He did the music for all those. But he got his start making Cronenberg films.
Well, I think the music's fine in this.
Yeah. And this is where, when I said that this is his transitionary film, like into being where his style was sort of developed, it's because this is the film where he got the crew together, the same guy who composes most of his music, the same cinematographer that he's had for like 40 years. The pacing is still off.
He did the score for fucking Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah.
And Ed Wood. I knew I recognized that name from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this is sort of where he got his real big start, was doing Cronenberg horror films.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. You're right. This guy's had a really weird. He even worked with Kevin Smith on Dogma.
Yeah,
huh, who knew?
Yeah, but you can trace his roots back to here. So, I mean, cool. I do not blame you, obviously, for not finishing it, because when I was a little worried when you said how you really don't care for the overly gooey, disgusting stuff. And I'm like, I get it. Like that, none of that stuff ever bothers me, but I'm like, I know that there's a lot of people that wouldn't be able to watch this.
Yeah. See, my love, what I love in horror is actually like psychological horror or situational horror. I am not a fan of gore or jump scares and things like that. I think it's just unnecessary.
I'm not a jump scare guy either. I'm terrified of that. But my favorite horror film of all time is The Thing. So if that gives you an idea, and specifically the remake of The Thing from
the remake of The Thing is fantastic, and that's gooey as hell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that's the exception that proves my rule, though. For me, like that's the only one that I would say is like that's really gooey, and it's really over the top.
If you look between 1979 and like 1982, the kings of producing films that had amazing gory visual effects, it was Cronenberg, Carpenter, and to a lesser extent, because of American Werewolf in London, you had what's his name there?
Not Joe Dante, was it?
No, John Landis.
John Landis. Yeah.
So there, and in fact, I believe they were interviewed at one point on television when they're like, "What are you doing basically at Hollywood?" Because the three of them released some of the goriest films of all time within like a 2-year period, and then they were pushing what visual effects could be like in the physical space before CGI came around and ruined everything. So, I see it for what it is. It's worth a watch if you can stomach that, but I don't think this is going to be one for most people. I feel he found a better balance for his pacing. It's still a little slower, and the whatever gory effects he has in his next film, which we'll be talking about next week, which is Scanners.
Which I'm really looking forward to watching.
See, I love Scanners. Again, it's weird, isn't it? Like, as gory as that can be with the head exploding that we all know and love.
Yeah.
Like,
well, again, if you notice, the gore in it is blood gore. I think where you guys might have trouble is not everybody likes mucus gore.
Yeah, and you see that in The Fly in spades, where Jeff Goldblum peels off one of his own fingernails.
Yeah, see, I don't like The Fly. Yeah. I don't like The Fly remake. That's the one thing I've already said. I'm like, I'm not a fan of that.
We're gonna briefly touch upon the idea is for the next show we do, we're gonna do Scanners. Because I don't think Mike's seen it. You said, right?
No.
Now, obviously, Aaron, you and I've seen it many times.
Yeah,
it's actually it's one of my mom's favorite movies, which of all things. So I've seen that, from when I was a kid, even. Which I might say something about why my taste in movies is the way it is. But we're doing that. We're going to do Videodrome, and we're going to do Dead Ringers. Now, the Dead Zone and The Fly. The Dead Zone, Mike and I think talked about a year ago or two. Briefly.
Plus everybody's talked about it by now.
Yeah, and we'll obviously touch upon it for like a minute or two, just say like what it is. It is, I would say, of his pre-2000s work, his most mainstream film.
Yeah.
It is the movie where Christopher Walken got his Walken speak from. Prior to that, none of his movies featured that distinct way that he talks, so that was, I guess, the first time. And The Fly, interestingly enough, I have never seen.
Oh, wow. My God. You are such a treat.
I have seen a couple effects here and there, and I've seen a couple clips, right? But I have never, ever sat down for more than maybe 5 minutes of that movie. And I've seen almost everything else he's done. So yeah, I'm gonna watch it. We'll briefly touch upon it, but we don't need to, because those are his two blockbuster American hits. And then Dead Ringers, I think you'll be interested in. I don't think either of you have seen that, right?
No, I just saw the trailer when you came over last time.
Okay, Jeremy Irons plays twin gynecologists, one of which is good and one of which is evil.
Yeah, I have not watched that, but I'll tell you what film is coming up that I have watched that I bet a lot of people haven't, and that's Crash.
Okay, that's the one I have,
but never saw
I've only seen bits and pieces. We are going to cover that the week later.
So I can't believe I've actually seen a Cronenberg film that neither of you have really.
Exactly. I know it by reputation, and I've seen bits and pieces of it, but never the whole thing. And I know it's right when it's in the transitionary period before James Spader went from being like Hollywood heartthrob to being bald old man Spader a couple years later.
Yeah, and it is a weird film.
So basically, he went from Stargate to Ultron in one swift go, more or less.
There was one movie he did after that called Supernova.
Heard of it, yeah.
It's incredibly bad because it went through development hell. It was supposed to come out in 1998, and it didn't come out till like 2001. And in that time period, he had gained like 50 pounds and lost all his hair. So we're going to skip Naked Lunch because it's not really horror, and
it's too fucking weird.
It's too weird, and if you don't like gooey stuff, that's not one to watch.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, and we're gonna skip M Butterfly, although I would recommend watching it sometime. It's based on an actual true story.
That one has my attention because it is based on a true story, and it's just strange enough thinking, you know what, this sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, a British delegate ends up in a multi-decade relationship that doesn't have, like a multi-decade relationship where they abstain from having sex with a woman that turns out to be a male spy in disguise. And it is based on a true story, and Jeremy Irons is in that as well. So that's a pure drama and not horror, obviously. Crash, we're going to include because it's a thriller. That's why, and I also want to see it. So that next week's show is the 80s. The week after that, we're going to do Crash Existenz, which is, I think, the first Cronenberg film I saw. And
I remember the advertising campaign for that movie.
Yeah, I'll hint. It came out a couple weeks before or after The Matrix and had similar ideas, so it didn't do well.
Yeah.
We're gonna skip Spider because that's just more of a mystery movie. And we're gonna skip his most recent films because most of them have just been weird dramas from books that don't make a lot of sense. But we are gonna do the two films to finish off Cronenberg's modern, like before he went back to being an art house guy. We're going to do History of Violence and Eastern Promises. I don't know if either of you have seen them.
No,
I have not, no.
But there was a girl I went to college with named Ashley who was obsessed with Eastern Promises. So I know all the big scenes, the scene with
Okay, don't
the
explain
attack.
anything.
That's all
Don't
I'll
explain
say.
anything. Don't
Yeah.
tell them anything because you've got to watch it.
Yeah.
Know that they are violent, but they are not gore. Well, okay. History of Violence is based off a graphic novel, and it is a story of a small town man who saves his local diner from robbers and brings unwanted attention upon himself. And it screws with his family's dynamic. And Eastern Promises, also starring Viggo Mortensen from that, is a
Russian
movie
mob or something?
about the Russian mob in London, and he plays a Russian captain,
Enforcer?
enforcer. That's right, in the Russian mob. And then the reason we're skipping the rest of his films is we don't have time before Halloween, and we might eventually revisit them again. But A Dangerous Method is also starring Viggo Mortensen, and that is about Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and their arguments on methods and how to deal with certain psychoses. And in that film, it's mostly like it's a drama, philosophical, but it's also got Keira Knightley in it as a sex-crazed Russian who is brought to the insane asylum because she wants to have sex out of marriage.
Okay.
Okay.
In the 1800s, right? So, and then there's Cosmopolis, which is based on a book about the end of the world, but it's all happening in the background, and it stars Robert Pattinson in his first movie that he did outside of Twilight. He did it on purposely sought out Cronenberg and tried to get the movie made himself. So they made the film because he couldn't stand being typecast. And he thought, who better to go to than Cronenberg? It's a drama thriller. It's interesting, but again, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so it's not worth putting in there. And then Maps to the Stars was his most recent film, which came out, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. And that one is based on a book. Again, it's closer to like a Coen Brothers type of movie, but it's weird. And that one again has Robert Pattinson. He tends to use the same actors from multiple films when they get along with them. Like I think Viggo Mortensen's been in 3 or 4 of them now, maybe more. So yeah, we're gonna do a couple from the 90s and a couple from the 2000s in our last one before Halloween, and then we'll go from there. And then I say at that point we'll have been cultured enough that we can say that we've seen everything. Because I feel like most people when they think of Cronenberg, they think of either The Fly or they think of the dude's head blowing up in Scanners, and that's it.
Yeah, that's kind of what that was the impression I had literally for decades. So I'm glad that I've seen what I've seen now. I'm becoming more worldly learned. And that's kind of the purpose of Loose Cannon, is to show you things you may not necessarily have heard. 'Cause
Yeah.
when me and Aaron did things, we showed you Dog Soldiers, which is a movie people may have heard of but may have never seen. We also did the Trancers franchise. Again, people might have, if you're a B-movie fan, you probably know who Tim Thomerson is, and you've heard the name Jack Death, but you don't know what the fuck we're talking about. So yeah, we got a lot of good stuff. We are still coming up on the end of the year, which is quickly approaching. So we'll probably have a couple more of these before the end of the year. We'll probably do a Christmas themed Loose Cannon where we look at off the wall Christmas movies you may not have be thinking of. So not just National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation or Ernest Saves Christmas, which is our Christmas commentary, by the way.
Should we do, was it Santa Claus Martian one?
I
Oh,
cut
Santa Claus. Yeah. A crossover with Earth versus Soup for Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
So yeah, we've got a lot of good stuff coming up
Yeah.
for the end of the year.
Out of the 3 here, or out of the 4 we watched, personally, I say Rabid is the one you should seek out the first. And then if you decide to watch the rest, go ahead. I'm going to assume we're all probably on board for the same.
Yeah, I agree. Rabid's actually a pretty darn good film.
So yeah, Michael, take us away.
All right, cool, guys. So once again, up on the site, we're going to have, as of the show's recording, you should have a new Turd or Treasure to enjoy on Canadian Thanksgiving weekend because, hey, as we've talked about in the Twig Main show, things are getting difficult to get a hold of right now due to pandemic shipping delays and stuff not being able to be shipped. So you're going to do your shopping. You may want to consider it now.
Yeah, and is it Columbus Day weekend in the States or something?
I don't recall.
I
live in a weird place where it's like I don't really keep track of dates.
A long weekend for you guys too? Is I think maybe not
this weekend.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay, then no.
Okay, then. So yeah, we got that coming up. We are also going to be doing our Twig Stargate SG1 thing. We're going to do a session 0 on the 23rd. That should be out by the Monday or Tuesday of that week. So we are going to have that. Also, as of this recording, you should be hearing classic episodes that we did with Cinemassacre's James Rolfe that we did a number of years ago, all leading up to the end of the month, where we're going to give you a brand new show that we did record back in July. So some of it's a little dated, so sorry about that, but the content is still evergreen. So be looking forward towards that towards the end of the month. Plus, we got reviews, the regular show. I'm going to talk to JT about Twig Sunday Funnies because I still have to see Venom, Let There Be Carnage. And there's just a lot of stuff to do. So,
and
all the Earth versus Soup stuff. That's
exactly. I'm going to jump in here for this week. We have Earth versus Soup, episode 37, which is Invisible Invaders, as well as 38, which is Project Moonbase.
So yeah, a lot of good stuff coming up on the site. And as always, if you people want to give us suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, you can send those to feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll pretty much cover anything as long as it's interesting and fun. So until next time, folks, it is time to clean up after yourselves. Please exit in an orderly manner. So we have been
Alex, the producer,
Aaron Pollyea,
and I've been your host, Mike the Birdman, saying be excellent to each other, and we'll see you again next time right here on Loose Cannon.
Are either one of these any good? Sir,
What?
are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Quick! Change the channel!
You're wasting your life making shit! Nobody cares! These movies are terrible!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
Lower your shields and surrender your listenership. We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.